We good? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today for Art for Environmental Awareness and Activism. My name is Angela McQuillan, and I'm the founder of Chimera, which is an online platform for art that relates to biology and technology. I'm based in Philadelphia, and we currently host in-person events in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York City. So please visit our website, which I'll put in the chat in a minute, where you can find more information on artists and exhibitions and events that are coming up. So I'm just admitting more people to the room. So today we have three amazing artists joining us: Marguerita Hagan, Iyvone Khoo, and Jonathan Latiano, who all work in different mediums and explore different concepts with the underlying theme of creating artwork that focuses on pressing environmental issues that, our planet is experiencing today. So I've asked each of these artists to give a brief introduction to their work to start off the session, and then we'll go into questions and discussion in the second half. So while the artists are presenting, I'll ask that everyone keeps their microphones on mute, but feel free to type any questions or comments in the chat. And then after the presentations, we'll open up the room for discussion, and you can feel free to participate in the discussion verbally or in the chat. So our first artist is Marguerita Hagan. Marguerita is a ceramic sculptor based in Philadelphia, and her work focuses on the relationship of micro to macro, and individual to collective. Sorry, I'm multitasking over here. Her intricate ceramic forms shine light on the wonder and respect for the fragile, diverse life, which our lives are intrinsically linked. She received her MFA from the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and her BFA in ceramics at James Madison University. And her projects include collaborations with artists, scientists, and community and environmental art science residencies, lectures nationally and internationally. So now I will go ahead and pass the mic to Marguerita, and I will spotlight you on the screen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Angela, and thanks for everybody for being here. I'm really honored to be on this panel, and I thank you for joining us live and those watching the recording. So how's that looking? So my passion is celebrating the gift of life in and around us, our beautiful planet, and each other, making visible the unseen wonders and mutually supportive systems that make our life possible. This is the mission and message of my work. As an activist for mutually thriving, sustainable communities and environments, interdependence is the rhythm of my practice. As everything is connected and we are in this together, it is what has enabled life to thrive for eons. Mycorrhiza fungi, the wood wide web, mother trees, corals, and diatom colonies have been modeling this for hundreds of millions of years. It is time that we got the memo as stewards of our planet, for our lives depend on it. And at this climacteric time, this is more vital than ever. Here is our home, the blue planet, thanks to the ocean, her largest element. As Dr. Sylvia Earle says, we must take care of the blue heart of our planet. It provides our every other breath and produces over 50% of Earth's oxygen. My wildlife work honors creatures throughout Earth's diverse ecosystems. The Lemaire series, a branch of the wildlife work, shines light on the life of the ocean, from magnifying micro to macro. So I was like 24 years old and I got to snorkel in tropical waters for the first time. And I was so blown away by these patterns that were designed so perfectly for their environment swimming around me. It sparked the wildlife series. And I began with dinner plates with patterns on both sides, but then it evolved into tableware and sculpture and vessels, and expanded into birds and insects and creatures of the Amazon, etc. But it was when I was trying to capture the pufferfish, that my shields developed, which are a thing of protection, as well as a crest of honoring family lineage, like with the species that we share our planet with. Well, when preparing for a show at Esther Klein that Angela curated, I stumbled across the Ernst Haeckel Art Forms in Nature, and this page really grabbed me by the shoulders. I was like, these look like shields needing to be made. I didn't even know what they were, but I learned they were radiolarians. These are one-cell organisms that are glass-laced. They live in the ocean, and this was a start of my Lemaire series. Here are radiolarians. They look like jewels. They in a microscope, and the Ernst Haeckel drawings, and he was a artist, scientist, and philosopher from the 19th century. So Lemaire began, and that's a vampire squid from hell. And I love dimensions, so my work had to jump off the wall, and I developed my micro marine sculpture and took research, and I love learning things, but these are dinoflagellates and these are diatoms. They're both seen through a microscope, one cell. Very hard to get this scale and even fathom it. But here's the first installation of this kind. It was called Marine Single Cell Mingle. That was at the closing of that exhibit, and a detail. So they reproduced and grew, and they ended up they've been in a lot of different installations. Here it is at the airport, the Philadelphia airport, curated by Leah Douglas. With my wildlife shields, it evolved into the Lemaire shields and into the marine micro sculptures. I was so moved when I learned about these organisms. They fuse together to form the most beautiful networks or colonies, like this stellate colony or spiral or chains and zigzag, because they know when they work together, they can do a lot better and produce more oxygen. This is a diatom odentella sculpture, the blue background, but the some of the guides that I use from microscopic images. And here it is in a spiral colony. It's like a diamond necklace. And the sculpture here that I made was in the ocean, the international exhibit at the New York Hall of Science. And the whale is down there because it is the main part of a whale's diet, the largest living organism on our planet, and that's how they get their greens, from the phytoplankton. These microorganisms go macro, and in the spring when they bloom, these are satellite images. They fill about a fifth of the ocean. And here's a colony in a shield. This is my exhibit at the Science Museum of Virginia. It was called People Protect What They Love. And I'm deeply inspired by working with artists and scientists and environmentalists. This is Dr. Eric Cordes and Diane Burko, and I visited him at the Cordes Labs that he runs at Temple University shortly after he discovered the longest known deep sea coral. It's 100 miles long. It's just off of Charleston, South Carolina, and incredible timing because Trump was getting ready to lift all the drilling there, the protection. And so his discovery saved what might have been a 40,000 years of growth of coral reef. Dr. Alexis Weinig is showing us some of the species that they collected to learn from, and it's a Lophelia pertusa is the main deep sea coral species. And this is my perpetual Lophelia pertusa. So Diane Burko invited me to be on a panel at the American Geophysical Union, and we shared it with some of the top coral scientists, and it's a gathering of 26,000 Earth and space scientists in the United States. They come from all over the world, but we did a coral reef ecosystem presentation and at the intersection of art and science. Mark Eakins is on the left. What a joy to be with this panel. Mark oversaw all coral survey for NOAA and is in the film Chasing Coral on Netflix. And Stuart Sandin is on the right from Scripps Ocean Institute. Kat Cantor did an article on our collaboration there in the Earth magazine. I get such profound inspiration by being in the water and seeing things firsthand. And this is a trip to Cayman in 2019. And I was deeply mesmerized by sea sponges on this trip. This is a blue azure sponge here on the lower left. So I came back and started this abstract series inspired by sponges. They filter over 90% of the ocean viruses and bacteria. And wildly enough, within that year, COVID hit, we were in lockdown, but within a year, the COVID vaccine was developed from the compounds of a sea sponge. So I was also preparing for Rising Tides at the Michener Art Museum. It was curated by Laura T. Igo. And this is a piece that I did for that, inspired by female brain coral spawning. It is now in the Michener's collection, and her name is Nefertiti. Laura gave me a 33 by 15-foot wall, and the show was honoring the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And it was just fantastic to work with my dear friend and cinematographer, Rich Gretzinger, who did the animation and the video projection with my ceramic work. This image projected here was a symbol of Earth Day, and it was taken by the Apollo 17 astronauts. It has an 8-minute looping video with 4 different sequences. You can see that on my website. This is a legend. I create these for my complicated pieces. And you can see that the sculpture and organisms are laid out in the currents of the ocean, but expand beyond Earth into a marine Milky Way to help us remember we are just one part of a very vast network and universe. Last year, I was in the Academy of Natural Sciences. This is my piece, Daughter Cells in the Front, and it was curated by Marina McDougall, and it was a microcosm of diatoms and snowflakes. And these are cases of my diatom sculptures. The diatom collection at the Academy is the second largest in the world, and it was started by the amazing Ruth Patrick, who is featured in the exhibit. She helped to establish the field of water ecology. I was also featured in the exhibit was Ernst Hagel, and what an absolute joy to be in the case with his Art Forms in Nature that was published in 1899, but this was like one of the early printings of it, and it was open to the page that actually sparked my Lemaire series. I collaborated with Dr. Marina Potapova, and she was my 911 lifeline diatom call, because I created a sculpture, a complex diatom sculpture, and here she is working, magnifying diatoms, but she shared the collection with me, and when I needed help, I could call her or text, and she'd send me images of views of diatoms that I wasn't able to get in my own research. This wild drawing on the lower right was done in the 1800s of this incredible diatom. That's my sketchbook on the left, but it ended up being in the center of this view of this piece called Flourish. And that face is honoring the matriarchs of the Academy, Dr. Ruth Patrick and Dr. Marina Potapova, for the diatoms on that view were all named by or for these amazing scientists. The other view is diatoms of ice and snow. The piece was celebrating the themes of the exhibit, and the piece was placed in the next to Ruth Patrick's portrait you see there. So being at the Academy, I had to make these diatoms scientifically accurate, and this is a legend of it to identify them all. So I always wanted to have flora and fauna in my wildlife series, but it took till 2021, but here Flora series emerged with this trio. On the lower level, you have life, and this is done in the spirit of mandala with its arms reaching up and reaching down, and it kind of sits on a mirror so it can reveal that inner subterranean world. And the piece on the top left is called Light, and that is a play on the photosynthesis process. It's happening somewhere always on the planet, wherever there's sunlight. And on the right is a play on the breathing portals on the underside of leaves called stomatas. This is the legend for the piece Life, and it identifies the 9 different plant families that I have built into that sculpture. I've just added fungi, and this is called Labyrinth and inspired by the yellow morel. And my newest piece is Champagne and Crinoline, inspired that wild mushroom called Phallus luteus. My message is alive in tableware through the primary producer line and the petroglyph series that includes Neolithic petroglyphs and even local Pennsylvania ones. So here's some encouraging words from Jacques Cousteau. And when we're feeling overwhelmed, remember to keep faith and have hope. as we can work together to find solutions. Keep asking and exploring, for the infinite wonders and solutions are everywhere. Cousteau said, people protect what they love. Fall in love. This expansive perspective opens our eyes and hearts to the resources within and around us. The universe is infinitely resourceful, and as each crisis arises, solutions do too. We are living at an incredible time, and we have a great opportunity to be the solution and transformation that is needed now. If microscopic organisms can support our whole planet, imagine what we can do when engaged together. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Don't we all need a diatom 911 lifeline, right? Yeah. All right, let me switch over our artist here. We're going to go to Iyvone Khoo. Whoops. There we go. Hey, Iyvone. So Iyvone is in Joshua Tree right now, and you're also from Singapore, have studied in London. Iyvone works in diverse media, including glass, photography, video, and also bioluminescence.
Cool.
Her sculptures, videos, and installations explore the contrast between ideas of nature and the artificial. Iyvone earned her MFA at Central St. Martin's in the University of Arts in London and was awarded the Barengo Student Prize. She's also a recipient of the prestigious Mead Fellowship Award, which allowed her to collaborate with scientists from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography on projects that incorporate light-emitting organisms, such as bioluminescent algae. So with that, I will go ahead and pass the mic over to you, Iyvone.
Hello, can you hear me? Am
Yes.
I good? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Angela, and everyone for being here. So my name is Iyvone Khoo. I'm from Singapore. And today I will talk very briefly about the work that I make and how I got from being a multimedia artist and turned eco-artist. So I make video, photographs, installations, and sculptures. In the multimedia landscape, I collaborate with scientists and conservationists, weaving art science and environmental awareness to highlight the global climate situation. So I work with video, sound, light, bioluminescence, invertebrates, post-consumer waste to create dystopian stories with dystopian spiritual undertones. So my work essentially explores the overlapping idea between nature and the artificial. So what you see here is some work, my very early work. I started working my art career working for a laser event company. I was a visualizer. Essentially, I visualized laser light shows. And this led me to an interest in creating spatial environment, which took me to London to study set design for theater. And during this time, I was experimenting making sculptures for dark spaces, for nightclubs using ultraviolet and laser light. When I got to London, in tandem to exploration with light, I started working and looking for alternative art making materials. So living in a city such as London, there was an abundance of post-consumer waste, especially plastic. And I would carry with me a UV light torch testing materials that I found. And what you're looking on the right, on the left image is essentially sculptures that we did for the Wellcome Trust. We hosted and facilitated workshops with high school students to work and create recycled sculptures with a scientist, Dr. Navid Khan, looking at cancer cells. So many years later, in the quest for eco-material, I'm currently now working with mycelium, which is the chair on the right. The reason that we've done it is because we felt that it's always something that we would want to use materials that in the right condition would biodegrade. And during my time in England, while I was working with trash, light, photography, and video projections, I would test the materiality of plastics, fabric, mirror crystals under all sorts of light with UV color light on melted plastics. And the image on the right is at the Zabludovic. It was a video projection with a mirror reflected. It's a video piece. This was one of the early pieces when I graduated in school from my MFA. And this one is what you're looking at is essentially a triptych of light painting photography. And this was one of a very early work, which many years later, I donated some of this in support for the anti-war to support the Ukrainians. And 100% of the sale were donated for the event. And this essentially were little toys, but they were not trash. They were toys, model sets with plastics that we found from commercial offcuts. And they were light painted with UV and lasers. So what you're looking at now essentially is the Mead Fellowship, which started me off on this trajectory and journey, life-changing journey, really. When I graduated from Central St. Martin's, I received the Mead Fellowship, which I proposed combining arts and science. It has always been a dream of mine to work with living life forms. And the aim was really to reimagine the phenomenon of bioluminescence. And I was essentially working with dinoflagellates in the lab, Michael Lett's lab. And I spent 3 summers filming in the lab, in the dark, these tiny microscopic organisms in flow without a microscope. And over the 3 years, I've developed unorthodox methods of stimulating their glow. Essentially, what it meant would be playing music to them, using fluid dynamics to stimulate their glow. And that took me 3 summers to figure out. And that image on the top was essentially the last image I took at the end of my residencies. So the project culminated into a public commission for the Birch Aquarium, which was an outreach space to communicate science to the public. And this was an infinity cube environment, video mapped with bioluminescent footage, where the public can experience the artistry and the beauty of bioluminescence, seeing themselves reflected into infinity, into a microcosmos of pulsating light. So in the video, there were music and sounds of instruments we used to stimulate their glow, the sound of a human heartbeat, the song, the whale songs, as well as water flow, mini water flows. So we were essentially making tiny little micro water flows. And just to give an idea of what the area that we were filming, it's probably the size of a confetti. So we are filming the size of a confetti to get the magnification. And we were essentially making mini water flow, probably around this size, about maybe 10 inches. So it's really a microcosm of light. And during my time at Scripps, I made friends with the opposite labs, and I started filming biofluorescence. It is essentially also a phenomena in nature. You can find them in the ocean, in plants, in insects. And so it started my new series of investigation looking at how these organisms work and react or re-emitted their light. It's 450 nanometers. So I also filmed, I was exploring loads of different corals, soft corals, hard corals, as well as flowers. And these are some endangered species I photographed in Singapore at the Botanical Garden Nursery. And so during my time at Scripps, I met several researchers that are working on climate issues. So one of them were Dr. Sarah-Jean Royal. And Dr. Royal was essentially investigating microplastics in the ocean and their effects on the environment. Subsequently, I met other activists such as the Vortex Swim, who swam across the Pacific and sailed across the Pacific, collecting data, highlighting the marine plastic crisis. So these people ended up being collaborators. And not too long ago, I met Noni Stanford. She is an activist and also an artist. And she has a collection of marine debris, which is spanning about 4 decades. So with her own resources, she would clean and collect marine plastic take fish nets off the famous Camilo Beach in Hilo. So Camilo Beach essentially is one of the most polluted beach in Hawaii. And I was very fortunate that I visited the beach. And the meeting of with this activist and Sarah Jean started this new whole series of work looking at plastic in paradise. So that was my series that I started probably in 2019. And I was filming using marine plastic debris to tell stories of the environmental crisis. Because I think these objects, we could relate to them, like seeing a toy and seeing, like a candy dispenser. I mean, it's an object that has very potent memories and in some way a collective cultural memory. So this was one of the first works using marine plastics from Dr. Sarah Jean, and it's called The Irony of Extinction. It essentially is a toy dinosaur who bites a shark-bitten bottle standing on an island of plastic glomerate. So what is plastic glomerate? It's essentially a new type of rock made from a mixture of sediments and other natural debris that is held together by plastic. You can find them on the beaches of Hawaii. It's very common, and probably in other parts of the world too. So the next image you're looking at is Plastic Wonderland. It's also part of the work from the plastic that were donated by the activists in Hawaii. This was actually from, I think, the Albatross Lab. So it was mailed to me and I created a series for that. And this digital assemblage series had added elements of video, and all pieces were collected from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is pretty special to me because somehow they've made their way from land to the ocean and back, and the whole full circle. And it's almost like I wanted to put a mirror and look at, take a look at these things. They're out there. In some way, they're kind of forgotten or unwanted artifacts, really. That's how I see it. So for Ocean Day, I collaborated with Snark Art in New York and Seed World Foundation in Hawaii, where some of the sale, 50% of the sale, was used to purchase beach cleaning equipment. So that was something that I was very happy with that I could contribute to. And next one. So the last, one more slide. This is a pop-up installation at the Exploratorium. This was plastic collected from the Vortex Swim. So upon their return from their journey, they were completing their sailing journey in San Francisco. So this was just some of the objects. And I had quite a fun interaction with this young person. He was so curious with the objects and he really wanted to touch them. So I opened it up and let him walk in and we were like touching and looking, and he was like really very entertained by the objects. So that was quite fun for me. So the next image are production shots of my assemblage setup. This is in situ at Camilo Beach with Auntie Noni. So essentially what I would do is to place the objects, because they are plastics and they're so brittle, I can't really place them and fuse them together. So I would just balance them and then take an image and process them digitally to add other moving images. So after many years working with plastic, I began searching for alternative medium, which led us to using mycelium. And we successfully grew a chair. And this was a project for a commission for Burning Man Festival. And we have been working for several years, making upcycle, recycle fabrics and installations, solar-powered art pieces for events, which we think is something we want to explore further, because we believe in the idea of using upcycling, refusing things that will outlast our lifetime. So I believe that when artists, scientists, and activists come together, we amplify each other's message. And my goal, really, as an artist, is to highlight the environmental crisis and the loss of species. So thank you so much for your time. I overran a little bit. These are my contact details. Please get in touch.
Thank you so much, Iyvone. Your work is so beautiful. And I love the idea of this discarded plastic as like this world traveler on a great journey. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to our next artist, Jonathan Latiano. Let me just switch over here. All right. So I think, Iyvone, you need to stop sharing your screen and switch over to Jonathan.
Mhm.
Right.
All right, so welcome, Jonathan. Jonathan Latiano is a sculptor and installation artist based in Boston, Massachusetts. He received his BA in studio art from Moravian College and his MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. So Jonathan has exhibited in numerous solo and group public art exhibitions nationally and internationally. And his artistic and teaching practices have earned him multiple honors and awards, including the Mary Sawyer's Baker Prize in Art, Moravian College's Outstanding Young Alumni Award, and the Bunting Teachers Fellowship in Fine Arts at the Maryland Institute College of Art. So with that, Jonathan, I will let you take it away.
No. Thank you, Angela, and thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the other presenters. What an honor it is to share this digital stage with you guys. So yeah, as Angela said, my name is Jonathan Latiano, and there we go. And my work tends to focus around ideas of deep time and these distances of time, these distances of space, where the only way that we can really kind of understand these elements through our human brain is to abstract them in our minds. And so because of that, my work tends to utilize elements such as evolution, extinction, scientific fields as geology, and of course then conservation as really vehicles for this idea of deep time. I personally feel that one of the root issues at the current climate crisis is this lack of understanding or lack of empathy for deep time, empathy for the generations that will come after us, this idea that what we're doing now will have an impact on our planet thousands, tens of thousands of years ahead of time. So what I'd like to do today is just talk about 5 specific pieces from my practice over the last 10 years that kind of focuses, I think, acutely around these ideas. So I'd like to start with this piece here, Points of Contention from 2011. This is the oldest piece that I'll show you guys today. And this is an artwork where you come into the gallery space and there's this large crystalline structure emerging out of the gallery floor. And each part of this structure is made of a material that has a half-life of about 10,000 years before it begins to decompose. And when we talk about time in that scale, we're talking about geologic time and these new ecosystems that are emerging on our planet and being created as a byproduct of the actions that we're currently undertaking as a species. This is also a good example of my work in installation art. And so a lot of times I'm interested in really how the artwork can author space for the viewer. And the viewer, in this case, can come into the space, they can walk onto this floor, they are really immersed in this piece. And this piece was architecturally integrated where it blended, really seamlessly into the space. In fact, the pre-existing floor that I created for this piece, or the new floor that sat on top of the pre-existing floor that I created for this piece, extended all the way out into the hallways of the gallery. This was shown at the School 33 Art Center in Baltimore, Maryland. So we had that complete level of authorization. When you get in closer to the piece, there is a fine layer of crystallized salt on the piece. And so we're talking about geologic growth, we're talking about crystallization, and then on a minute scale within the gallery, that is actually happening. And salt would, even if like the piece is growing only a centimeter or two over the course of the exhibition, salt would going to become a very important element in my work. And in a little bit, you'll see, I guess, the logical conclusion of that, or the illogical conclusion of that. Here's a detail of the work. The next piece I'd like to talk about is this piece here from 2014, Flight of the Baji. This was a work that I made for the Baltimore Museum of Art. And it was a piece about loss. It was a piece about the kind of ephemerality of the world that we live in. And it was a memorial to the Baji river dolphin, which at the time was functionally extinct. River dolphin now is officially extinct. And what functional extinction is when, you know, we haven't seen any in the wild for a long time. If there are any in the wild, there's probably not a breeding population there. The Baji was never able to successfully be raised in captivity. There's only ever one Baji river dolphin they were ever able to do that. Her name was Kiki the dolphin. In fact, if you see any images of Baji river dolphin, it's about a 9 out of 10 chance that it's Kiki, because she was photographed so much. But so the Baji river dolphin, this really beautiful megafauna, was in this kind of almost categorical limbo, where we weren't 100% sure it was totally gone. Most likely it's gone, but it's actually hard to prove definitively when a species is extinct. And unfortunately now the Baji River has officially crossed over into that category. And so I made this piece where I spent about 6 months in Maryland, in local kind of fresh bodies of water, rivers, streams, lakes. The thing that I could get, the closest analog I could get to the Baji's natural habitat, short of going to China. And so I created this, you know, using all of that driftwood. I would take that freshwater driftwood, I would bleach it to sterilize it, but also kind of, you know, shift the color of it to more of this, feel more like bone than wood in a way. And I ended up creating this piece where we have this kind of pile of this driftwater, this freshwater driftwood. It kicks up into the air, it begins to clump and form into what I could try to get to be the most anatomically correct one-to-one sculptures of these Baji River dolphins skeletons. There's about 220 hand-carved components in each skeleton. I'm forced to react to the natural shape of the driftwood, so it's these kind of imperfect things. The skeletons skim along the wall, and then they fragment apart again, dissolving into this kind of like setting sun on the other end of the gallery. It's a piece where I specifically didn't use any power tools in it. Everything had to be done by hand. I spent all this, you know, hundreds of hours working on this piece, dozens of hours, out in the woods by myself, really trying to create some sort of connection to this creature that was now potentially gone forever. And ultimately, the piece is about failure. It's about a failure to connect with that. It doesn't matter how much time I spent making this thing, how much time I spent studying the Baji River dolphin. The piece is a failure. I am not bringing that back. This piece isn't bringing that back. Nothing is bringing that back. And so when this piece was completed, it was meticulously taken apart and disassembled, and never shown again. For time reasons, I'm going to skip over this piece, but here is another skeleton-based work. This was recently shown at the Grizzly Art Gallery in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here's that example of really taking that salt to its kind of conclusion. This is a full salt installation, 1,000 pounds of evaporated salt that coat every surface of the gallery. In the center of the piece is a polar bear skeleton that I've carved, suspended in this lattice work of crystallized salt. It's a piece about how these two very different ecosystems, a evaporated salt desert and a frozen Arctic desert, are on these kind of almost conceptual crash courses with each other, where they're going, as they overlap and blend into each other, right? They can also they're so similar and yet can never exist at the same time because of temperature. This incredibly beautiful, powerful megafauna is crushed as those two things happen. This piece here, one of my most recent pieces, Love to the Letter and the Letter Spelled Death, is a love letter that I made for my wife, who is a zoologist by training, who specialized in rhino conservation and now works as a wetland scientist and ecologist. And it focuses around this kind of large rhinoceros skeleton that is based off the same, the southern white rhino, which is the species that she specializes in. And it sits in this gallery on this big mound, this massive mound of sound absorbing foam. And across the way sits this holographic image playing of this cellist, a 1-to-1 projection of a human cellist serenading the rhinoceros. They're both looking kind of at each other and one is playing to the other. And this is a piece where this whole thing started off as I'm going to make this thing for Carly, my wife, who is so passionate about what she does. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with this skeleton. And it eventually evolved into this piece that's this memorial to the conservation movement. It's this monument to what's happening now in it, and the power and commitment and love that fuels that, and then this memorial to what potentially could come from the future. And it's this idea of if you're going to write a love letter to a conservationist right now in 2023 or 2022, when this was made, do not be surprised when it turns into an obituary. This is this idea of the world that we live in. At the actual opening, the cellist Nicole Boguslaw, an incredibly talented cellist that I was privileged to collaborate with, was actually in the gallery playing during that. And Nicole and I, we spent a long time selecting different compositions of music for this. We used a lot of Bach for it, and then Nicole also wrote a selection of songs for this. This trying to strike this balance between something that is almost cinematic in its beauty and still somber in that sense. And then lastly, I would love to talk about my recent artist residency at the Ocean Alliance in Gloucester, Massachusetts. This is the Gedman artist residency at the Rocky Neck Artist Colony, and my two colleagues here, my two fellow artists on the panel, I would highly recommend both of you apply for this residency. I think you guys would just love it so much there. And so this was a month last September where I lived in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I was set up with a studio and worked alongside kind of this idea of parallel play with the Ocean Alliance, these are some of the world's leading researchers in whale conservation, in whale research. Travel the world, they are, doing some of the most interesting, exciting stuff out there. And when I was working on this, when I was living and working alongside of them, this thing that I noticed, they've been around since the 70s. And so they have these incredible offices that are filled with 50 years of just little things that like they would pick up, you know, or like keep and covet. These like incredible, they're not, you know, like bits and bobs and ends, and it's everything from the vertebrae of a, you know, northern right whale, which is critically endangered, to like this little stone they found on a beach in Mexico that they just thought was cool. And their offices are just these almost incredible cabinets of curiosity in that way. And so I ended up building, during my time at the Ocean Alliance, was this kind of large black alien rock that was composed out of all this upcycled foam that I got from a colleague of mine in Boston here, who had just finished a large public arts piece. These were all the cutoffs. He gave me all the cutoffs from the foam that he used for that. And I went in and I carved that foam to mirror the really specific granite formations that are everywhere in Gloucester. And this large kind of like alien black stone, as it cracks open, there's this Victorian cabinet of curiosities inside that is filled with hundreds of these little items from their offices and curated in that series, in that way. And it's this idea of like, what is worth saving? Like here for me is a portrait of these incredibly brilliant, passionate conservationists who have given their lives to trying to save, like understand and save the world's whale populations. And this idea of it takes such love and commitment, you know, and resolve to keep doing that and keep showing up day after day after day. And sometimes they win battles and sometimes they lose battles, but they keep showing up. And so here is this like collection of people who are like so passionate about what they do, and it tells this story of that passion. And it's again this kind of hierarchy of preciousness, like what is worth saving, what is worth saving for these scientists, what is worth saving for our society. I think I think the hierarchy of preciousness in what we value sometimes as a species is has gone astray. And so this piece here that I created with them, so the first thing is like I was only there for a month, and the big thing is like, how do I keep tricking these, how do I con these whale scientists into keep hanging out with me, right? Like, because I was just like, it was just a dream, like being around them and watching them work. So this piece will go on to be the centerpiece of an upcoming solo exhibition I have at the Space Gallery in Portland, Maine, and that'll run from August 4th to September 16th. Here is the gallery, or a rendering of the gallery. And what I'm proposing is, again, like kind of bringing this more into this larger immersive installation. And this piece is already evolving far past this initial rendering, but it will involve sound and performances and all these different things, which I'm very, you know, excited to keep working with these people. And that is my presentation. Thank you for listening. And there's my website where you can find the rest of my portfolio and my full CV. And of course, there's my handle on Instagram if you want to see any of the more like immediate studio kind of stuff. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was beautiful. I don't think I've seen the latest work with the rock and the cabinet of curiosities. So that's beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing. So now we have about 10 minutes left. I would love to go ahead and open, everyone can go ahead and unmute if you want to ask any questions to the artists. I'd love to open it up for discussion. So, or you can type any questions in the chat. And I can go ahead and kick us off. So, what do you think is the role of artists when it comes to addressing environmental issues? What is the purpose of this type of art making?
I could just say artists are true pioneers. I feel like if you follow artwork over time, it'll give you the pulse of what's happening in the consciousness of what's happening in history and the culture at that time. But I think we're all about exposing and helping raise awareness. There were so many examples of how artists have done this, but let you guys jump in there too. Can say film, so many films, Agnes Dennis. I mean, there's incredible examples.
I think about this question a lot about like, where's the role of the artist in all of this? And, you know, one thing that I think is, you know, scientists are really, really good at actually communicating their ideas. You know, they've got the numbers, they've got the charts, they're brilliant communicators. They should be, right? They're constantly writing for grants and that kind of stuff. It's like where I think the role of the artist, or one of the roles of an artist can play in this, is how do we capture not only the greater nuances of these ideas, but the emotion behind it? Because it is usually emotion that will fuel a, you know, change. And, you know, I recently was in Iceland, and I'd never been in Iceland before, and I got to visit a glacier, and I'd never visited a glacier before, and I knew all about glaciers. What I wasn't expecting was this incredible emotional resonance of it, where this thing is beautiful and it is old and it is important, but it is terrifying. It's this hyper object. And the weirdest thing was like, and I believe in conserving glaciers. I know it's a controversial point, everybody, right? Like, no, it's like, that's easy, right? What I wasn't prepared for was like, I am terrified of this thing and I love it. Like, I love it, you know, like, and I don't want it, you know, like this really gut thing of like, no, please keep these. So how does the artist capture that and convey that for someone who can't go see a glacier in person?
Right.
So for me, I think, what is the role of the artist? This is a question that I ask myself a lot. And when it comes to addressing environmental issues, I think it all starts with the individual. And I would say that I could reflect at my own way, my own practice. And in some way, these issues provide structures, directions, and informs my choices of materials. It also provides inspiration for my work. And I think that the core role for me is to communicate what I see, and also the emotion, the feeling of what is happening. But it is it's a question that takes a long time to figure, and it's really hard to answer, because I could see myself as a communicator, but I could see myself as someone trying to do something that is essentially telling people, stop doing this, look at what we are doing to the environment. But in some way, I think if we can connect in an emotional way, I think that for me is my role.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I think that's a good point, connecting emotionally, because yeah, I mean, anyone can read a scientific journal or, you know, some data graph, but you really have to connect emotionally in order to really spark some kind of change. I just want to open it up to the audience, or sorry,
I was just going to say, I feel like this point is very important in my work, inviting people to fall in love, because if you get to magnifying these things that are often unseen by even Iyvone, a lot of your work, we have a lot of parallels. So thrilling to see your work too. That if you see these things, you can't help but love them, and then you'll want to take care of them. But it's, I think, through the heart and through the tenderness, these feelings is a really important, visually and through music. and movement, all different forms of art. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love to open this question up to the audience. I know some of you are artists, or if anyone has any comments, I invite you to share.
I'll jump in if it's all right.
Yes.
I'm also an artist dealing with similar issues. And I was wondering if anybody on the panel, I find myself actually struggling to some degree with despair in terms of what I'm doing, like feelings of if half the population isn't going to listen to the world scientists, how are they going to pay attention to like me? I guess I kind of fall back on maybe I'm just one little cog in the environmental zeitgeist. But regardless whether what I do has a instrumental effect or not, it's what I'm passionate about and it's what I care about, and so it's what I have to make work about. But I was curious if that sense of despair ever hits any of you. I've found all of your talks very inspirational. So yeah.
I feel like I want to jump in that first of all, you were not alone. And PTSD, climate change PTSD is actually real, and they're therapists and there's all sorts of help for that. But I've been listening to some climate change scientists lately, and the thing is, this can feel so overwhelming, and but the one thing we can really focus on is that that happens, but like the waves, just let it roll over, because you know that everybody's thoughts and their actions make a huge difference in the world, whether we see it or not. And there are little things that we can do that can make us feel so good about, like, not using plastics and finding biodegradable containers and ways. And I have a page on my website called eSources, which is an environmental resource for us for everyday things, and also very inspiring films and authors and youth-led environmental movements. So if we just can focus on what we can do and the positive changes that we can make within ourselves and within our homes, and connect with other people that share this spirit and this vision, it's the way that we can move forward. But it really helps to connect with others with like minds and like spirits. And there are many practical things that we can do. That seems to help me. It's one word that on a number of interviews that I've been hearing lately, they've been encouraging this too, but I feel like it's just keep our focus on what we can do on our solutions, because it is overwhelming and nobody can do it alone. But yeah, we can do it together.
I just finished a piece. This was a busy year for me. It was great. A lot of shows that went away because of the pandemic came back, and that was, fantastic. So I ended up doing 6 shows about death, or 5 shows about death and 1 about hope, and we ended on hope. And this piece was called "The Only Thing That's the End of the World Is the End of the World." And it was a piece in response to, the current political environment. It was in response to COVID, but then also in response to like everything that we're talking about here, right? About, the climate, and just, what's happening in the world ecologically. And it is easy, I think, to fall into nihilism, right? But this idea of like, okay, then if there's 2 types of people, the ones who are going to like lay down and let it pass over them, or actually actively fuel it, maybe 3 types of people, and then the other ones who are going to rage against it. And you can also rage against it not through anger, but through beauty and complexity and nuance. I also really do believe, I mean, it's these collective actions. I can't think of one artwork that collectively changed something, but I can think of 100, right, that collect, you know, over the course of a decade, that really did change the way that people think about things. And that is, and it's subtle, and it's the most infuriating part of it is sometimes we don't see it happening. But I think it's the most, dare I say, one of the most valuable things.
Well,
Oops,
I
we have
think
a
that-
question. So I just want to respect everyone's time. We'll just take this last question and then I think we'll have to end the session, but go right ahead, Pierre. You're on mute.
This is Lucy, and I'm gonna reveal that I'm Marguerita's sister. So I wanted to say she was given a little handmade gift that says, "Be brilliant, make waves, repeat." And I want to encourage you all to be your brilliant selves, continue to make waves and repeat. Marguerita does that day in and day out. And I've heard so many more things I could be doing to help the environment than I have taken on. But she gave me this silk dental floss to use. I can never go back to using dental floss that could possibly choke a fish.
And
I
it's in a glass jar.
Yeah, it's in a glass jar. So I just want to encourage you to be brilliant, make waves, and repeat, and just don't stop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love those words, very inspiring. We'll have to go ahead and end it there, and we should have a part 2 because I feel like there's a lot more to
Yes.
be said. But thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Marguerita, Jonathan, Iyvone, for presenting today. It was a pleasure to see your work.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.